The desert wind whistles across an endless expanse of cracked earth. The camera pans down to a rusted Mauser rifle half buried in the sand, a sun-bleached skull beside it. Far away, the faint outline of vultures circles above. They were driven into the desert to die, not because they fought a war, but because they existed. This is not a forgotten battle. It is not a tragic accident of history. This is the story of one of the first genocides of the 20th century, the extermination of the Herero and Nama peoples by the German Empire in what is now Namibia. A story buried under colonial lies for over a century until the truth began to claw its way back into the light. Welcome to Sands of History, where we uncover the untold, the hidden, and the deliberately erased chapters of our past. If you value deep, uncompromising dives into history's most crucial and controversial moments, please like, share, and subscribe, and help us keep these stories alive by supporting us financially through the links in the description below. Namibia, before the colonizers, long before German soldiers set foot on this soil, the land we now call Namibia was home to a tapestry of peoples, the Herero, skilled pastoralists whose wealth lay in vast herds of cattle, the Nama, adept traders and fierce horsemen, the Damara, the San, and others, each with their own languages, customs, and territories. The Herero, in particular, lived a semi-nomadic life. Cattle were not just food. They were currency, status, and spiritual wealth. Land was shared according to seasonal grazing, and waterholes were fiercely protected. Disputes were settled through negotiation or ritual combat, but wars of annihilation were rare. This balance began to change in the late 1800s. The scramble for Africa and German ambition. By the 1880s, European powers were carving Africa into colonies at the Berlin Conference. Germany, a newly unified empire under Otto von Bismarck, arrived late to the imperial feast, but was eager to prove itself a world power. In 1884, Germany declared the region German Southwest Africa. On paper, treaties with local chiefs legitimized this claim. In reality, many were signed under pressure, with chiefs often misled about their true meaning. Colonial companies and settlers began arriving, staking claims to land and resources. The Germans brought with them a racial hierarchy that placed Africans at the bottom. Laws forbade Africans from owning land in certain areas, restricted their movement, and forced them into labor for white settlers. By the 1890s, the Herero were losing grazing land at an alarming rate. German settlers fenced off prime territory, seized water sources, and sometimes took cattle without payment. When the Herero resisted through local skirmishes, they were met with armed retaliation. The boiling point. Debt became another weapon. German traders lent money or goods to Herero herders at high interest, accepting cattle as collateral. When repayment inevitably failed, the traders seized more and more livestock. By 1903, many Herero families were destitute. Their lands were shrinking, their water sources controlled by settlers, and their independence slipping away. Racial insults and public beatings were not uncommon. Finally, in January 1904, Herero patience snapped. Led by Chief Samuel Maherero, the Herero launched a coordinated revolt. German farms, trading posts, and military outposts were attacked. Around 100 German settlers were killed. Yet even in war, Maherero showed restraint. He issued an order that women, children, missionaries, and non-German Europeans be spared. This was not a war of extermination, at least, not for the Herero. Berlin's answer: von Trotha arrives. The uprising shocked Berlin. This was the empire's largest colony, and its prestige was at stake. The Kaiser's government dispatched General Lothar von Trotha, a man with a brutal reputation from campaigns in East Africa and China. Von Trotha made his intentions clear before even arriving. I shall annihilate the rebellious tribes with streams of blood. In August 1904, von Trotha met the Herero at the Battle of Waterberg. The Germans, armed with machine guns and heavy artillery, smashed through Herero defenses. But instead of pursuing them in battle, Von Trotha drove them into the Omaheka Desert, a vast, waterless expanse. The Vernichtungsbefehl, order to exterminate. On October 2nd, 1904, von Trotha issued the infamous Vernichtungsbefehl, or extermination order. Within the German borders, every Herero, with or without a rifle, with or without cattle, will be shot. I no longer accept women or children. They must be driven back to their people or fired upon. His troops sealed the desert's edges, poisoned waterholes and shot anyone trying to return. Survivors spoke of days without water, of mothers watching children collapse in the sand, of fathers leaving the weakest behind to save the rest. A German soldier later recalled, "I saw countless bodies, men, women and children, lying dead around dried-up wells." By early 1905, 80% of the Herero population, around 60,000 to 80,000 people, had been wiped out. The Nama joined the fight. The Nama people, led by Hendrik Witbooi and later Jacob Morenga, initially tried to maintain peace with the Germans, but after witnessing the Herero slaughter, they took up arms in late 1904. For 4 years, they waged a guerrilla war, ambushing German patrols and cutting supply lines. But the Germans responded with the same methods: scorched earth, destruction of villages, and targeted killings. Von Trotha issued a second extermination order. The Nama who chooses not to surrender will be destroyed. By 1908, half of the Nama population, about 10,000 people, were dead. Concentration camps and racial science. The survivors, Herero, Nama, and others, were rounded up into concentration camps, decades before the term became synonymous with Nazi Germany. The most feared was Shark Island, a barren, windswept rock near Luderitz. Here, prisoners labored in chains, breaking rocks or loading ships, often under whip blows. Food was scarce, disease rampant, and medical care non-existent. Mortality rates reached 70%. Adding a grotesque layer to the horror, German doctors and anthropologists conducted racial studies on the prisoners. Skulls were sent to Berlin for scientific measurements meant to prove European superiority. One German anthropologist wrote chillingly, "Science must prove our superiority." Women were forced to boil the severed heads of the dead to strip them of flesh before shipment to Germany. Silence and erasure. By 1908, the genocide was over. German settlers now controlled the best lands, and the Herero and Nama who survived were forced into labor without pay, wearing identification tags like livestock. In Germany, the colonial government framed the campaign as a glorious victory over rebellious tribes. Newspapers praised von Trotha. The deaths of tens of thousands were justified as the price of civilization. For most of the 20th century, the genocide was absent from history books. Even after Namibia fell under South African rule in 1915, the story was rarely taught. The long road to recognition. It took decades for the truth to be acknowledged. In 1985, the United Nations Whitaker Report listed the Herero and Nama extermination as one of the first genocides of the 20th century. In 2001, representatives of the Herero people filed a lawsuit in the United States against the German government and German companies that had profited from their forced labor. Though unsuccessful, it reignited international attention. In 2004, on the 100th anniversary of the uprising, German Development Minister Heidemarie Wieczorek-Zoel stood on Namibian soil and said, "We Germans accept our historical and moral responsibility and the guilt incurred by Germans at that time." Still, it wasn't until May 2021 that Germany officially recognized the events as genocide and pledged over 1.1 billion in aid over 30 years. Herero and Nama leaders criticized the deal, arguing that the aid was not true reparations and that they had been excluded from negotiations. Legacy and echoes in history. The methods used in Namibia, concentration camps, forced labor, racial pseudoscience, would later echo ominously in Nazi Germany's policies during the Second World War. Some historians argue that the colonial campaign was a grim rehearsal for the Holocaust. The legacy lives on in Namibia today. Vast tracts of the best farmland remain in the hands of descendants of German settlers. Herero and Nama activists continue to demand land restitution and direct reparations. For them, recognition without justice is not enough. The genocide of the Herero and Nama was not an accident of war. It was a deliberate campaign of extermination, born from the toxic mix of imperial ambition and racial ideology. It is a chapter of history that demands to be remembered, not just for its victims, but as a warning of what happens when humanity is stripped away in the name of power. This was Sands of History. If you found value in uncovering this hidden chapter of our past, please like, share, and subscribe, and help us continue this work by supporting us financially through the links in the description. Your support keeps history alive.